Hey everybody, today is Monday, May 27th, 2024. Coming up on the show today, from Baby Reindeer, editor Peter Oliver.
I think the first time I read it, I could see that it was going to be a dark ride, so I think the darkness comes out, but the comedy is in there, and even Richard said, in the darkest places he's laughed, and in the lightest places he can find darkness. You still feel sympathy for Martha, even though you know what she's done. And I think that's what's amazing about Richard Gadd, is that he has treated her like that all the way through. Whatever she does, he still has that empathy or sympathy for her. Sometimes I've had actors in the room, but I'm a little nervous about them in the room because if they start going through takes and saying, well, why didn't you use this take? So that's why I don't usually have them. I did once when I was working on a show called Teachers early in my career. I invited the actors in, and that was a mistake.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, greetings once again, my friends. Thank you for checking out the podcast. I am thrilled you are here. Always am. Okay, lots to get to, so let's get to it. Today we're talking about the Netflix miniseries Baby Reindeer. And if you've seen it, and I know a lot of you have based on both its ranking on Netflix, as well as all the chatter about it online, but if you've seen it, you know that we have some interesting and complicated ground to cover. I was completely drawn into this one. It was expertly crafted, especially in light of the powerful material from creator Richard Gadd. Not only did Gadd write and star in the series, it's autobiographical. And that's one thing when the story is about how your team won the big game or how you climbed Mount Everest. But when it's about a man being relentlessly stalked by a woman, when it's about that and also the trauma from abuse, trauma that would make him more vulnerable to a situation like being stalked by a woman who herself has clearly been traumatized, when that is the autobiographical material you are working with, what can I say? And that is probably why I struggled with this interview a little more than usual. Aside from my customary nonsensical blathering, I couldn't help but feel extra conscious about the questions I was asking and the words I was choosing. Thankfully, editor Peter Oliver was on hand to not only make sense of what I was asking, but to provide wonderfully insightful answers and a fascinating view into what it was like to edit such a show. So, super happy to have Peter here, and we'll talk to him about Baby Reindeer in just a moment. But first, let me tell you a thing or two that you can use in your life as a film or TV maker. First up is a free tip on how you can make your next movie or TV show sound amazing. And that is by visiting our cool friends and benevolent sponsor, Extreme Music. For over 25 years, they've given filmmakers and artists just like yourself the very best in movie music or TV music, all created by multi-award-winning musicians and composers. Great music from names you've heard of and some you haven't heard of. Yet, that is. But you will, because they're just that awesome. For your part in all this, all you need to do is go to extrememusic.com, sign up for a free account, and jump headfirst into an enormous catalog of production audio that features any kind of music your little heart desires. It's really fun and really simple to do, using searchable keywords like tempo, genre, lyrics, composer, instrumentation, or you can skip the searching part and just upload a reference track to Extreme Music, and they will find you ones like it. And you don't just get the finished track. You can get it in all kinds of flavors, right down to the stems, so you can go with vocals or no vocals, or just the keyboard track or no keyboard track. It's all up to you to decide. And for the licensing, well, you can do that all online as well, or they can personally lend a hand from one of their many, many worldwide offices. So make one of the best decisions you could ever make and partner up with Extreme Music to make your story sound its very, very best. Okay, here's a little more news for you. If you head on over to blog.frame.io/theroughcut, you can enjoy The Rough Cut as a transcribed, full-on multimedia experience. That's right, not only can you read the podcast, as many times as you like actually, you can just sit there all day and just read it over and over again. They won't charge you a thing. But along with the transcript, you get images like behind-the-scenes photos and avid timeline shots. You get videos of the YouTube variety, where you can see trailers and educational videos that help explore the topics we discuss. You even get music in the form of Spotify playlists with the needle drops from the film or show we're covering. Now just think of the cost of higher education these days. It's ridiculous. It's astronomical. So I remind you, this is free and full of great film and TV knowledge. Where do you get all that great stuff? Well, I told you before, and I will tell you again. blog.frame.io/theroughcut. Now then, time for today's featured attraction. Clocking in from Great Britain is one great editor. From Baby Reindeer, here's Peter Oliver.
No, I couldn't stand in front of a crowd. I went to LA with Richard and Veronica and Jess and Nava, and I had to do a thing in front of 350 people, and I didn't like that. I just wanted my edit suite back. I'm quite happy in my dark room.
I thought we would start off talking about something that inevitably comes up during the course of these interviews, and that's tone. I've seen Baby Reindeer described or labeled in a few different ways, but the word comedy is always a part of that description, and it certainly has comedy in it. But after you finish the series and you look back upon it, that is not necessarily the first word that comes to mind. So if you can, please describe the tone of this show and any guidelines you use to maintain it.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say how great it is to be here, and I've seen and heard your back catalogue, and it's incredible. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
The tone of the show, I think the first time I read it, I could see that it was going to be a dark ride. So I think the darkness comes out, but as you said before, the comedy is in there. And even Richard said in an interview, I think he said that in the darkest places, he's laughed, and in the lightest places, he can find darkness. And he said sometimes, and I'm going to quote, hopefully this is right, that he said even backstage at a stand-up comedy night, there's a level of depression sometimes. And I think that is what comes across in his writing, first of all. My agent, Kate Watson, sent me the script. When I read the script, I remember sitting up in bed, reading and reading and reading. And I was a little surprised at first because it was called Baby Reindeer, and I think she knows my likeness of the darkness rather than the light. And when she first phoned me, I thought, well, this isn't probably not the job for me, because Baby Reindeer is obviously a title that we all have association with Christmas. So that was my first kind of stumbling block. But then she sent me the script, and when I read the script, it was just like, wow. And I just couldn't put it down. And then I said to her the next morning, I think I finished them all in an evening, and then said to her, I need an interview, please get me an interview. And Clerkenwell very kindly took me on for the interview. And I've worked with Clerkenwell a couple of times, but I've never finished a job with them, because unfortunately the first one was Cheaters, and we had lockdown, so it was the pandemic. And then the second one of the actresses fell ill, and so I couldn't finish that one either. And then Baby Reindeer. So it was good that they let me back. So I read the script and got the interview, and then went in the interview. I was working at a place called Newtopia, who do documentaries. I got a room ready and had half an hour to spare, so I'd be zen-like when the interview came. And then I went to the room, and there was people in the room, and I was like, oh no. So I went to reception. They gave me another room. There was no Wi-Fi. I went to another room, and by the time I switched on, it was like 2 minutes before, and there was a whole sea of faces. I only thought it was going to be Veronica and Richard, and there was execs and producers and all the rest of it. So it was a little surprise in the interview. And then the other thing about the interview was I couldn't remember Donny's name, because all my sheets had gone on the floor because I was in such a hurry in the end. And I had to admit that I couldn't remember the lead character's name. And he, Richard very kindly told me it, and I thought, well, that's the end of that interview. So I was a little surprised a week later when my agent, Kate Watson, phoned me and said, yeah, you've got it, which is incredible. And I was dancing around the edit suite. But tone. So the tone of the show, I think it was prevalent in the script, so it was never a problem. And then the actors took the comedy side of it, and I love that switch from darkness to light. Jess Gunning's very good at switching from... There's a scene halfway through episode 1 where she's talking about her birthday, and she says, my birthday's coming up, and there's banter between the two of them. They're joking together, her and Donny, across the bar. And then she asks him for his phone number, and suddenly everything switches. And so the whole tone of the scene switches. So what I liked about what Richard was doing was he was always playing with the tone between the two of them. And you kind of fall in love with Martha. And then there's those moments where you're, no, don't do it. Don't give her your number. Don't do this. And so we worked a lot into those scenes. When I started, I think I put a lot of laughter in the background of that scene. It's a busy bar scene. And the music was Helen Fry by the Felice Brothers. And I chose that early on, even in the assembly, because it has this lovely line of, she's a master of disguise in the chorus. And what I really love to do is, like, at the beginning of the scene, it was a bit of a roller coaster because it was all fun and everything was happening and there was laughter in the background and this music was playing out of the jukebox in the pub. And then when she asks him for the phone, it's the first time we come frontal on both of them, front shots. And then we have this mad pause and everything drops out. You just hear very subliminally this music in the background just saying, she's in disguise, she's in disguise. And then the scene ends with her laughing again, but it's more of a horror laugh. It's kind of like, it's a different tone. So we were always playing with that tone. And Veronica and I as well, the director, were playing with that even before Richard came in. And then Richard came into the edit suite as well. So I had a pass with Veronica over episodes 1, 2, 3 and 4. Then Richard came in and it almost became like a magnet, the edit suite, because then we'd get an exec in and they'd end up staying, and then the producers end up staying, and it became quite a communal edit. I think also because of the voiceover element of it, Ed McDonald, one of the execs, is very good at wording those. I mean, obviously it's mostly Richard, but he would be like, oh, Richard, can you go and re-record this slightly differently? And we didn't have any other space, so Richard would have to record it in the corridor. And I always wondered what people thought as they walked past this bizarre voiceover that he'd be recording up and down the corridor. And you think, oh, I wonder what people think, either in other edit suites or down the corridors.
You know, part of the high wire act of this show and why it works so well is that a character like Martha Scott can do bad things and say funny things, but the way that you so delicately manage her, she isn't a bad person. And even if she's being funny, the humor doesn't come at the expense of her mental illness. Tell me about that aspect of treating Martha and working with the absolutely brilliant performances of Jessica Gunning.
Well, I think it's down to Richard originally in the script, because he always treated her like a lost character rather than a bad character or an evil character. She was always a lost soul, and so was Donny. And so you get elements of that all the way up to episode 6. I think it's the last time you see Martha. I didn't cut that episode, Mike Holliday did, but there's a courtroom scene, and I think you're still wondering who's guilty in that courtroom all the way until the end of that scene. But they're both in the docks, and it's filmed so beautifully by Josephine and edited by Mike, and you still feel sympathy for Martha all the way up until then, even though you know what she's done. And I think that's what's amazing about Richard Gadd, is that he has treated her like that all the way through, and whatever she does, he still has that empathy or sympathy for her. And Jess was just amazing. I spoke to her at a premiere, and she was saying that in the auditions for it, she just like kept going and kept going and kept going. And I think that they were looking for a slightly older actress, but she knew that it was her part, and so she just kept on at them until they gave it to her. And she's a lovely, lovely, beautiful lady. But just the way that in the rushes she just turned was amazing. Really, really beautifully done.
You know, what's so funny about the job of the editor is that you are so close to these people that you've never met. Like, you spend hours and hours and hours watching them at their most vulnerable. Like, you feel like you know them, and then you meet them for the first time in person. What is that experience like, where you just feel like, I know you so well, but you barely know who I am?
I met Jess once when I went to see Veronica at lunchtime, just popped over to set, but the first time I saw her after we'd edited, I just went up and gave her a massive hug. And it was very similar to that. She was kind of like, who are you kind of thing, but she's so lovely that she took the hug. Some people don't. But yeah, she was just a fantastic actress to work with, as was Richard, just to be able to, I call him the Trinity, because he wrote it, starred in it and exec'd it. So he's got all those hats on at the same time. And also it's about his life. So it was a hard ride for him, I think, but he was very gracious in the edit suite and always complimentary.
When you do eventually meet the performers, do they have questions for you about your job or about the performances they've given you? Do they ask you anything about, well, what was it like cutting together all these different performances that I gave?
Sometimes I've had actors in the room, but I've never had a writer, actor, exec producer, and it's been about his life. But sometimes I'm a little nervous about them in the room, because if they start going through takes and saying, well, should we use this take? Should we use that take? And why didn't you use this take? So that's why I don't usually have them in the edit suite. I did once when I was working on a show called Teachers early in my career. I invited the actors in, and that was a mistake because they were like, well, what about using this take and use this bit and this bit? And they didn't quite understand that it's all got to go together as well. But Richard was always very inquisitive about why we use takes, and we went through a lot of the rushes with him, but most of the time, luckily, he saw that we'd got the take that he preferred as well. So my nervousness about having actors in is that they'll get self-conscious about their own performance, but Richard is obviously overseeing all of it, the Trinity, watching over us all.
Well, you painted a very vivid picture about the interview process, all these different people that you've never met before.
Yeah.
What did they want to know from you? What did they ask you?
I think they just asked about what I thought about the script, and in a lot of interviews I can say how maybe I'd restructure it or have questions about it, but it just felt very fluid. I could almost picture it. I come from an arts background, so I kind of picture it before we go into it, and so I think their questions were mainly about the script, but it was just such a well-written script already. Maybe the voiceover obviously changed and then the picture evolved with that. That's why it was so great for Richard to go out, record it and then come back in so that we could have that constant evolution.
As you've said a few times, he is the Trinity, writer, star, creator.
It's probably more than 3.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of hats.
Yeah.
I was not familiar with Baby Reindeer prior to the show. I know it was a play. It didn't sound like you were when you talked about reading the script, but were you aware of Baby Reindeer prior to the script?
No, and I didn't know much about Richard either. So it came out of nowhere for me. So this was the first I'd heard of it.
I don't know if there were recorded performances of his play or the play itself that you could read. Did you go back and look at any of those things to help you with this, or did you just go straight to the script and the dailies?
We had it in the Avid from early on. It was ingested so that I could always check on different moments. The main thing was that he's got this lovely collage almost of voices from Martha at the beginning of the play. And he was very keen on getting that into the drama somehow. We tried to have lots of different voices, and I got my wife to record them and lots of different people to record them. And then Jess very kindly recorded them and sent them on the phone as well. So we had all this, like the stage show, we had that all at the front and it was all very busy. And then I'd like to say it was Ed's idea, but I can't remember. Someone had the idea of the cold opener, taking Police Station from 4, beginning of 4, and putting it onto episode 1. And we had struggled with that. Just how do we open it? Is it a cold opener with her coming into the pub? Or do we need to know something before? And it just felt right when we took that scene from episode 4 and put it onto the front of episode 1, because then even though you knew exactly what she'd done and he was reporting her, when she walks in, you still feel sympathy for her. You still see the lost, lonely Martha walking in. And we put sounds like rain in the background just to emphasize how lonely and sad she was. And then she looks up, and it was important to Veronica when she looked up and when they joined eyes. And so we worked a lot on that. But apart from that, I don't think we took a lot from the stage show. Well, obviously Richard did, because it evolved into the scripts, but we didn't use it that much.
Where were you cutting?
I was in London, just in Soho, and they were all over the place. I think the first scene I got was the Edinburgh scene, because Edinburgh Festival was fast approaching and they had to quickly send Veronica and a hit squad up and film the street scenes in Edinburgh, because a lot of the real performers from the Edinburgh show probably saved them a lot of money on extras by having the real festival going on. So that was the first scene that they shot. And then most of it was around London, I think, all of the other scenes. And then obviously he goes up to Scotland, but that's the second block. So I didn't really know that much about where that was filmed.
Okay, let's talk about the blocks for a second. You have different DPs, different directors, and different editors from the first 4 episodes to the last 3.
Yeah.
Same assistant crew across all 7, which I thought was interesting.
I think the assistants went all the way through for continuity, which I think was a really good idea. But our DOP was Christoph, and he knew Veronica before and had worked with Veronica before. And so that's how that teaming went. The rest of the crew, I don't know that much about the rest of the crew. I didn't really meet a lot of them. I think the continuity script supervisor was the same. I want to say it was the same all the way through, which is again, very important, and she was great for us.
The blocks were shot at the same time?
I think there was a couple of weeks where they were shooting together, and then there were a few shots that Block 2 picked up for us. But I think that's mainly so that Veronica can come into the edit and they can still be shooting on set, so that the episodes progress whilst they're still filming. So that's why there's two.
And you had never worked with Veronica prior to Baby Reindeer?
No, I just had that interview with her and I think she thought I was amusing. So I don't know, something. I think a lot of people went for it and I was quite late in the interviewing. So I was just fortunate to get it in the end. But Veronica was brilliant. She's very thorough and she knows what she wants. And you can see in her direction that she knows exactly what she wants.
I think that's a good little tip you slipped in there about getting a job. I always interview towards the end so they remember you best. That's not a bad bit of advice.
Yeah, no, that's good. But in the edit suite, there was conversations like I think Stephen King said about the first, amazingly, Stephen King said about the first 2 minutes that he knew who the characters were straight away, which was really impressive because those first 2 minutes did used to be 8 minutes, I think, and then we gradually brought them down. And there was conversations about how much of Martha's staring at Donny we should have in that first scene. And it was interesting, but I think that we did the right thing by shortening it down so that she didn't seem too strange at the beginning, let's say.
How much of the style of the show, all these interesting visual treatments, were expressly laid out for you, and how much was it you discovering them in the cutting room?
It was mostly us discovering them. There's a scene where Martha sat at the bar and she comes in and puts her handbag down. And that was quite choreographed because it spins round Donny. And so when those kind of scenes come in, I can see how the director wants to do it. And it's about what costumes we want and her performance and how to fit the kind of spinning montage scenes in. And there's another scene, I think, where she opens the doors and they open like 3 times and she has a different costume on. And that's very much Veronica doing her amazing directing. But there are other places where we'd kind of spent a long time on how long to hold a pause or how many reactions, because often with comedy as well, in the moments of comedy, you can really get a couple more laughs by going to reactions and then coming back, or how long you pause. There's a great scene at the end of 2 by the canal that says everything for me that Baby Reindeer does, which is the scene where Donny's walking back along the canal late at night. And you have the jump scare to start off with, Martha blocking his way, and then you have the comedy of what she's saying. She says, if you don't think I'm attractive, you're either blind or gay, and I can't see you walking up the stairs holding the banister. And so you've got that, and it's funny, and then when she starts chasing him, you go, oh, no, 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 and it's that moment again of, no, get away, and then she abuses him at the end of the scene. Those scenes are just a joy to work on because there's so much going on. And it's kind of like, how long do you stay on one of them? How long do you stay on the other? And they're both such great actors that they could both hold the scene for the whole scene. But it's when we cut away and when we cut to the different characters. So I think there was more of that going on than anything else, kind of like, how long can we hold on them? And when do we reveal? The frontal shots was a big thing of Veronica's. So in the cafe as well, that we have a lot of profile shots in episode 1 where they're discussing what they're going to eat and drink in the cafe, and then suddenly you go into the frontal shots, and it's something that I think that Veronica and Christoph really worked on quite hard on set.
The characters looking into camera, or almost into camera, was it something you talked about with Veronica in terms of there's a psychology to that? Why did she go that route?
I very rarely spoke to Veronica when she was on set because she's busy. So a lot of the time these days I text directors. I mean, it's just easier for them. And also most of them are just like, this was amazing. I love this scene, just because I think that they just need words of affirmation. So if I have great scenes, which Veronica gave me a lot of, I'd just be like, this is amazing. This is so cool. And then she would text back a few times saying, did this work? Did this work? Do we need another shot? And so I always have a wish list as well. So I always have, can we have this? Can we have this? Can we have this? And they can either ignore it or they can pick it up. But with Veronica, I think she really had an idea of a sense of what she wanted to do all the way through. And I send weekly assemblies out and I didn't hear anything back from her or anyone really, which I thought was a good thing, but it might have been that they were just too busy.
No news is generally good news.
Yeah, exactly. So I kept my job at least. So that was the great thing.
That is a good thing. Something else you see are these slight push-ins. Sometimes they're more dramatic, like it's definitely an in-camera zoom. Then there's other times it's just a little subtle, kind of creeping in a little bit. And whenever I see that, I wonder, was it shot that way, or was it, I'm just going to push in just a little bit in post?
I do a lot of those, and most directors, Veronica was very giving with that, but most directors take them straight out because they can see their digital zooms, because I think you can see the focus change if it's in camera. I always love to put little creeps in, especially on longer shots, and so I put in a lot of those slight pushes in, and got away with most of them.
There's a sequence where Donny is falling for Terry, and you do sort of a 360 around them. And then later when he's drinking with Darian, there's another 360 around him.
Yeah, that 360, the one in the bar in Scotland was really, really tough, just to link it all up. And however well, and they did do it brilliantly on set, it's really quite complicated to link exactly the words that you want to be linking up. Eventually I left it because once again I had to go on to another job. I was doing a job called Eric and I ran out of time, so a lovely guy called Benji came in and finished them off, and I think he did a better job than me on the 360s. So he did a little bit more work than me on those kind of details.
If you can, describe what it is you're working with. What are you having to stitch together, and how do you go about doing it?
Well, for those scenes particularly, they just kept going round and round. You can't do it too technically because it interferes with the fluidity of the scene. And so they're doing pretty much the same rotation. And then in the edit, you have to do a bit of speeding up and slowing down, and then some clever wipes. If you have any awkward cuts, you can put someone wiping past. But Veronica got a lot of rushes, which I love, and Jess and Richard and all the actors were really good at giving slight different performances, which is really, really important, because you can have a note that an exec or someone says that it's not sad enough, it's not whatever enough. And then if you just tweak 3 or 4 shots through the whole episode, then suddenly it changes everything. And so I love having different rushes and different takes to go from, and just keep rinsing over those takes. I love the nuances and reactions and actions, and just to keep going through the rushes and finding tiny little things. And then sometimes with Veronica, I'd change a slight thing, and I think she'd realise, but then again, not getting away with it, but she'd be open to me not just doing what she wants to do, but if I wanted to just tweak some little things as well. Richard and Veronica were always up for that, which is really freeing.
You have Richard, who's the writer of this material.
Yeah.
So you would think on the one hand, he's going to feel like, no, we've got to stick to what I wrote. On the other, he's a comedian, and it's all about improv. Where does the truth lie there? Was there a lot of improv in the material you were given, or did they stick pretty close to the script?
I think they did stick pretty close. I mean, I've done shows before, and improv has worked. With kids, for instance, improv is really important, and just the sense of playing. But I think that they did stick pretty close to what Richard was giving them, and it must have been quite nerve-wracking for for actors who were working with Richard, because they were working with his script, and they knew that maybe he was watching them to see, he was right opposite them the whole time, but he allowed for creativity in the edit suite, and I think he allowed for creativity there as well. But on my first pass, I always check the script with the picture to make sure that I haven't lost any lines. All the lines have been covered. And it was pretty much as Richard had written it.
Another element of the show, and I think this is where a lot of the comedy does come through, is through the emails from Martha.
Yeah. I mean, I think we worked on those, and again, with Matt Jarvis and Ed McDonald in the edit suite, and Matthew Mueller came in as well. And so those were some of the finer details we worked on with Richard. I mean, Richard had got the overall emails, but there was a question of pace and how often we should have them, and would they interfere with the show, which Richard always said that they wouldn't, and he was completely right. And sometimes we'd take some of them out and put them back, and 9 times out of 10 I think we put them back, but Most of it were as Richard had written. And then we had little comedy moments like when Martha's sending him emails about sex, and I think I came up with cunnilingus because they said she could spell some of the words, longer words perfectly, and some of the shorter words she couldn't spell. So there was some creativity in that, but most of it was definitely Richard's script. But a lot of it did evolve, and because I'm dyslexic, a lot of the time I misspelt things anyway, and so it's kind of like I didn't even realise that they were misspelt, and they were like, oh no, you have to spell it like this. But there was a lot of doing things and undoing things in the edit. It was very experimental, which was lovely. I just had to keep to speed. With a few people in the edit suite, you kind of have to undo, then redo, then do this, try this, try this, try this, try this. So a lot of concentration needed, I think.
The overriding gag is that she doesn't have a smartphone. She has an old Nokia phone, not an iPhone, but she ends all her messages with "sent from my iPhone."
Yeah.
But there are times when that is spelled correctly.
Yeah.
And then there's times when even "sent from my iPhone" is all messed up.
Yeah.
Why would she at sometimes spell those wrong?
As I say, I'm dyslexic, so I probably didn't even realise. Luckily, I had a great assistant, Andrew Reynolds, who did a lot of those emails, but also did a lot of the early VFX work. But that was definitely something that Richard had intended right from the start, and I think all of them were misspelt to start off with. I think even in the online, they were being changed slightly, so it was always an evolution of the edit, so it was always carrying on, and Richard playing with different words and different ways of saying things. I was amazed as well because they were quite long ones. I kept saying, maybe we should shorten these down. In episode 4 as well, I didn't think that we could have Richard's voiceover over black for so long. There's a really long one in the middle, and I was always thinking, no, this is too long. It was like a minute and a half, I think, when he said that he stayed at Darian's house. But you kind of needed that moment of black because so much had happened in 4 that you needed a pause before carrying on, and it was very clever as well. And Richard stuck to his guns and had quite a long section of black in episode 4.
We started things off talking about taking a little bit of 4, him going to the police finally, and putting that at the very beginning of the show.
I think that was Richard's idea, I must say.
He's a genius. But the non-linearity of the show seems like something you could get really tied up in knots in the editing room. How do you manage all that?
Well, I think on this one, it was definitely mostly that was as scripted. I don't think we did that very often. There was only a few occasions because it was kind of linear. I mean, I know we go back and forward in the episodes, but within the episodes, I think there's a definite linear path. And so I don't think we changed a lot of things around there.
We talked about the tone and balancing comedy versus drama. The show gets so dark into a place that's just so serious in episode 4 that it would almost seem like a huge shift if you're not just sort of dialing down the comedy to a degree. And I just wondered if that was something you talked about with Richard as you're working through 1, 2, and 3, that we sort of have to earn our way to episode 4.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you can see that Donny's rising, and I think the only time he shouts is at the end of 3 when he's telling Martha to get out of the pub after she's ripped Terry's hair out and beaten her up. And then I think that that's where it becomes really quite serious. And then you've still got some jokes at the beginning of 4, like the buttons in the collection pot and all of that kind of stuff. And I think 4 is nice because it doesn't start that dark, and also even when he's at the police station and he puts the phone up and it says eggs on it, there's very funny moments. But then we did keep shifting stuff around, and what I personally do is, I know a lot of editors have stills of all the scenes, but I think for this one, because we didn't have to restructure it a lot, I just have lots and lots of timelines. And so I'll just dupe a timeline and then just label it so that I know what order it's in, and then do the next one, so that if anyone ever wants to look back on things, then we can always find it. It takes up a lot more memory, but it's the way that I prefer to do it because then I can flick back to it as soon as anyone requests seeing that. Yeah, because there was some reshuffling in that episode of when we come back, how long he's at Darian's house and how much of that happens in one go. And then towards the end as well, there was quite a lot of restructuring, or just playing really in the edit suite, just playing, what if we do this? What if we put this scene forward? And Richard was happy for us to play and watch different versions of that.
So just to put a fine point on what you've already talked about with the voiceover, I believe that Richard had said that the voiceover was actually first intended for episode 4. And that looking at it in 4, it's like, well, this would work in the previous episodes.
Yeah.
Was that something that he did before you sat down, that he started working it into the scripts beforehand? Or was that something, once you had already started, he said, we got to go back and do this?
All the scripts that I read had some form of voiceover in. And on set as well, he'd record and send me as we were going. At first, I'd just write them on the screen. But then whenever he got a spare moment, he'd record a version of the voiceover and send it. And so in all the assemblies, we had some form of voiceover. But I can understand where it could come from, that when he was writing the script, I'm sure he went to 4 and then worked his way back. I never heard of that, but I could see that that would be quite a clever way of doing things.
You know, when you're working with a showrunner who's also the writer, that's one element for an editor.
Yeah.
When it's autobiographical and of such a profound and very heavy nature, again, this is another question I don't quite know how to put into words, but just working with Richard in the cutting room on things like this that are very painful for him to be working with.
I think that maybe the edit took slightly longer because it was so personal to him that I think he needed time to... We'd sometimes send him a play out and then he'd come in and talk about it because he wanted to watch it at night or because he just needed space with it. And so we'd allow space with him. But as I said, he was very generous in the edit. He would try lots of different things and he'd be very complimentary to me. And then sometimes we'd just sit with stuff. And that's partly, I think, that we had people in just so we could just discuss through. And sometimes we had to allow for days when we just needed to discuss stuff and discuss the edit and discuss how he wanted to go with it and how close to the script it was, or he'd just have times of discussion in the edit, which I love anyway, because for me, it's amazing to bottleneck from having so many people on set to then having just a few people in the edit. And for me, it's just so lovely, first of all, to have Veronica in after she's been talking to all these people on set, and then she has to come in just to the edit. And then with Richard as well, just to discuss through some stuff. I always say that the edit suite's a confidential place. So it's just great to have discussions with Richard and Veronica and a few others about how we're going to progress through stuff and what Richard's feelings are, what Richard's feelings were at the time. Have we got it right? How can we tweak it? How can we feel more like that? But I think it comes across because it's been so personal to so many people, and people have come up to me and said that it's affected them and that they've had relatives who have been through similar stuff. And I always look for hope in anything that I do. And this one really, I think it's hard to see when you first read the script where the hope is. But with the charity that comes up at the end, We Are Survivors, their rate went up like 80%, I think. And there's another one, Susie Langplu Trust. They went up 24%. And so all of these things are going up because Richard survived it and Richard told his story. So at times it was hard for him to tell his story in lots of different ways. And it was hard for us as well because at times there was a knot in my stomach and I wept with him on the floor when he'd been abused in episode 4, and it really affected, I think, a lot of the crew and cast, and in the edit, it went all the way through. So, and now it's affecting a lot of people out there. So I think it's a positive thing.
Absolutely. And hearing your answer, I now have the words I couldn't find before, and that is the material is so powerful that I think in general, it begs for more time and consideration in the cutting room. And then when it's autobiographical and the writer and star is there with you, and so much great material. What stands out to you in terms of what got left on the cutting room floor, and what was the biggest challenge you faced in tightening this story without losing any great moments?
I think everything earned its place because they were only 30-minute shows, so they weren't that long. And so I always felt it because Richard was in the edit suite, and if we'd cut out even some of his lines, I'd be like, oh, how's this? Is that okay? More so than normally, you know, I can be Edward Scissorhands in different edits, but with this one, that's again why I had so many different versions, so that I could say, Richard, what do you think to this? Does he miss those lines? And again, a lot of the time he was very gracious and said, no, that's fine. But there was bigger scenes that had to come out more in episode 1 to shape who Martha was. And we didn't tell too much too soon. And there was this lovely scene that actually had to come out, very funny scene, it was out and in and out and in, and then eventually we said, no, it's coming out. So Richard's writing's brilliant, and it was hard for us to take any of that out, but at times we needed to. And sometimes, again, when I said we'd do a play out and he could go away and watch it and then come back in the morning, because he just needs that space. And I understand that as well, because sometimes I go home and just watch stuff again on my phone, or, just to get a different vibe off it. And that's what Richard needed. So some of the time he just needed that space to watch through things.
I had wanted to ask you about what may have caught your attention in terms of the public's reaction to the show. I think you already kind of answered that brilliantly. So I'll turn it around a little bit and ask if there was anything that you learned from this experience working on Baby Reindeer.
Because unfortunately, I went on to another job before we could fully finish them. I kind of went away, and I knew it was a lovely little show. And one thing that Veronica and Richard always did was sometimes you cut things to go, will the audience like this? Will the audience not like this? But I think there was a very strong resistance on that, and they wanted to tell the story how they wanted to tell it. And they weren't bothered by notes, or me included, saying, why don't we cut this down, pace this up. A lot of the notes that we get from different people are pace it up, pace it up, pace it up. And they kind of ignored that and had their own pace to it. And I think that that's part of what an audience got hold of. But also, I think it's just an everyman. I mean, Donny's just a man working in a bar. It's not like White Lotus, which is brilliant. But it's not about exclusive people. It's about, all of us have got the darkness in our lives. All of us have had stuff happen to us. But Richard was brave enough to tell his story, and he works in a bar. And so, it's like the everyman story. It's kind of like he's just working towards his dreams.
Yeah, it's an incredible show and a very challenging subject. It was obviously difficult for me at times to put into words the questions I wanted to ask.
No, it was fine.
You just want to honor this material properly.
Yeah.
I think you all did an amazing job. I've saved the hardest question I could possibly ask for last. No. And that is Donny Dunn funny?
Is Donny... Donny Dunn can be funny. I think some of his lines are really funny. One of the scenes that took us the longest to cut was the first comedy scene with Donny, when he stands up, because it's really hard even assembling it. It's kind of like, is this funny or is this not funny? And as an editor, I tried to make it as funny as I could, and the audience would laugh and all the rest of it. And then when Veronica came in, she said, no, they're not supposed to be laughing. And it's that balance of, as an editor, I just want to make it funny because it's a comedy scene, or it's someone standing up doing comedy. And that whole thing that I was talking about before, about the pauses and just holding on an awkward silence, is brilliant. But I think Donny is funny, and I think that definitely he gets funnier. And then when he does that whole thing where he goes, Donny Dunn, halfway through the series, I think that's really funny. And I was laughing at the edit suite when I first heard him do the Donny Dunn and talking about his relationships and all of the rest at the beginning of that. So Donny can be funny, but I think it's nice that he's not funny in a way. Again, in Edinburgh as well, it was that whole, like, how funny do we want to make him? How funny is he? I think he just got funnier with the same material, because he acted it differently later, and obviously the audience in the pub laugh later. So it's very clever, because the temptation, I think, with the script would be to make it funnier as he went along, but he had the same material but delivered it differently and was more comfortable on the stage, and then I think it did become funny. So I think Donny Dunn is funny.
Well, you certainly deserve accolades for the work you did on this show.
No, thank you.
For nothing else, for trying to make Donny funny.
Thank you very much.
I think if we're looking for anything here on the podcast, aside from valuable knowledge about film and TV making, it's to find something new and different. Baby Reindeer is definitely something different. It's unique, it's provocative, it's funny, it's profound, it's moving. And you got to be talented to cut something like that, and there is no doubt that Peter and all the editors on Baby Reindeer are just that. Very grateful that we got to have Peter here with us today, and I am sure we will be catching up with him again in the future. So thank you, Peter. And I would thank you to take a minute or two to check out what's new with Avid Media Composer. And I'm going to give you a little inside tip. I think some interesting things are going to be happening with Media Composer this year. I really do. Certainly if I can help it. Yes, the title tool sucks right now. That issue is being addressed. But while that's being fixed, some really great new functionality is being added, starting with how Media Composer and Pro Tools interact, which is great for me as a podcaster because I spend a lot of time in Pro Tools. I love Pro Tools, so much fun, and so is Media Composer. Plus, it can help you make a great living. And isn't that the key to life? Making a living doing what you love? It's not always that easy, I know, especially in Hollywood this year. So to my Hollywood friends who are having a tough time making ends meet right now, just know that I'm thinking of you and pulling for you and here to help you however I can. As for the rest of you, I love you too. And I would love it if you zipped on over to the Media Composer page on avid.com and took a look at what's new and maybe even downloaded a trial version of Media Composer Ultimate. As always, there is a link in the show notes to help you with that. So that is a wrap on the show today. I hope you liked it. Today, here in the United States, it's Memorial Day. At least it is if you're listening to this on the day it comes out. I hope the day off has given you a chance to slow down and spend some time with friends and family, and most importantly, to remember and honor all the people who sacrificed everything to preserve what it is we have, or at least preserve the promise of what we hope it can be. Because of this much-needed moment to take a pause, I may not have time to get a new episode out to you next week. But if I don't, I will try to get back to the podcast as soon as possible. Either way, I can't wait to catch up with you again so we can talk a little editing and meet some new friends. So until next time, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.